The biggest movie star on the planet ended up $11 million in debt. His creditors included the IRS, 2 talent agencies, and his own toupee maker, who was owed $121,000. And the last role Hollywood ever offered him was in the very film built from his own life. It was September 6th, 2018, in Jupiter, Florida, when Burt Reynolds died of a heart attack at 82. At that moment, he was preparing to play ranch owner George Spahn in Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He had done the readings. He had told friends how much the part meant to him. He never filmed a frame, and Bruce Dern stepped into the role. But Reynolds is all over that movie anyway, because Leonardo DiCaprio's Rick Dalton, the television cowboy watching his stardom slip away in 1969, was stitched together from real careers, and the biggest single thread runs straight through Burt Reynolds. The TV westerns, the flight to Italy to make a Sergio Corbucci western. Even one of Rick Dalton's fake movie posters was modeled on a real Reynolds film. Hollywood gave you the fiction. The true story behind it is funnier, sadder, and far more brutal. Understand what Reynolds actually was. For 5 consecutive years, from 1978 through 1982, exhibitors voted him the #1 box office star in America, a streak almost nobody in history has matched. Before that, he was exactly what Rick Dalton is, a contract cowboy grinding through television, terrified the phone would stop ringing. And after the peak came a collapse so complete it included tabloid ruin, physical breakdown, and bankruptcy court. This is the story of the real fading star behind Rick Dalton, the football player who lost his future in a car crash, the TV cowboy who fled to Italy to stay alive in the business, the superstar who turned down some of the greatest roles ever written, and the fall that took nearly everything except the one thing Rick Dalton wanted most. But here is the question to hold on to. Tarantino's film asks whether a fading star can get one more shot. Burt Reynolds got his in 1997 in the most unlikely film imaginable. What he did with it might be the strangest twist in this whole story. Start with a lie he told for decades. Burt Reynolds spent most of his career claiming he was born in Waycross, Georgia, a good old boy origin that fit the Bandit image perfectly. The truth, which he finally admitted late in life, was Lansing, Michigan, February 11, 1936, where his family lived when his father was drafted into the Army. The family eventually settled in Riviera Beach, Florida, where his father, Burton Milo Reynolds Sr., became the town's chief of police. The chief was Granite. Tough, silent, impossible to impress, and young Buddy, as everyone called Burt, spent his whole childhood trying. What he wanted most, his entire life, was for the toughest man he knew to say he was proud of him. Football almost got him there. Reynolds was a genuine talent, a halfback good enough to win a scholarship to Florida State University in the mid-1950s, with real professional dreams. Then it all ended in pieces. A knee injury tore into his college career, and a serious car crash finished the job, wrecking his body and his future in one stroke. He was around 20, aimless and angry. A college teacher pushed him toward acting almost as therapy, and to his own astonishment, the broken jock won awards on stage. By 1959, after knocking around New York, he had a television contract and a spot on a series called Riverboat. It paid steady money. It also introduced him to a stuntman named Hal Needham, who was hired to double him, and who became his closest friend for the next half-century. If you have seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you know that friendship. It is Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, the star and the double who becomes family. Tarantino took it from these two men, right down to the fact that Needham later lived in Reynolds' guest house for 12 years. Now, understand the machine Reynolds was trapped in, because it is the exact machine that traps Rick Dalton. Call it the television cowboy factory. The opportunity was the Western boom. By the late 1950s, Westerns dominated American television, dozens of them airing every single week, and the networks needed an endless supply of square-jawed young men. The inside connection was the studio contract system, which signed handsome unknowns cheap changed their names, capped their teeth, and installed them as series leads. The execution was an assembly line. A young actor got a show, a horse, a catchphrase, and instant fame in every living room in America. The money was the trap. Contract players earned a fixed salary, while the studio owned everything: the show, the image, sometimes even the stage name, and a television cowboy earning good weekly money was still a pauper next to a movie star. And the problem was the ceiling. Movie studios and movie audiences looked down on television actors, so the very fame that fed these men also branded them. When their series died, they discovered the film business did not want them, and by the late 60s, as the Western boom collapsed, an entire generation of TV cowboys hit that wall at once. Tarantino has named them: Ty Hardin, the star of Bronco; Edd Byrnes from 77 Sunset Strip; Vince Edwards; George Maharis. Rick Dalton is all of them fused together, the star of the fictional Bounty Law with Nowhere to Go. And in 1962, Burt Reynolds was standing in the same line cast on Gunsmoke, television's biggest Western, playing the blacksmith Quint Asper for 3 seasons. Steady work, a dead end. He could feel it. So, in 1966, Reynolds did the thing that ties him to Rick Dalton forever. He went to Italy. Here is how that pipeline worked, and it is one of the strangest rescue systems in Hollywood history. The opportunity was the spaghetti western explosion. After Sergio Leone struck gold with Clint Eastwood, another fading American TV cowboy, Italian producers wanted their own American faces, because a recognizable television name from the States sold tickets across Europe. The inside connection was the talent agencies, quietly brokering deals that Hollywood considered a step down but that paid real money for a few weeks of work in Spain and Rome. The execution was chaos. Tiny budgets, dubbed dialogue, directors shouting through interpreters, and violence far bloodier than American television allowed. The money was survival cash and, for a lucky few like Eastwood, a launching pad. And the problem was the smell of failure. In Hollywood's eyes, going to Italy confirmed you were finished. Reynolds starred in Navajo Joe for director Sergio Corbucci, the same real director Tarantino has the fictional Rick Dalton work for in the film, and Reynolds loathed the experience. He joked for years afterward that the movie was shown only in prisons and on airplanes, because nobody could leave. When Tarantino's designers built Rick Dalton's fake Italian movie posters, they modeled one directly on Navajo Joe. That is not loose inspiration. That is a direct lift from Burt Reynolds' worst year. Back home, Reynolds ground through more television. The cop shows Hawk in 1966 and Dan August in 1970. And by then, he was in his mid-30s, exactly Rick Dalton's age. Exactly Rick Dalton's situation. A charming, aging TV leading man whom the movies had rejected for over a decade. What saved him was not a role. It was his mouth. Reynolds started appearing on the talk show circuit, especially with Johnny Carson, and America discovered the thing his cowboy parts had hidden. He was hilarious. Self-mocking, quick, dangerous, and warm, the talk shows made him famous as himself. Then, in 1972, came the double explosion. In April, he posed nearly nude as a centerfold in Cosmopolitan magazine, a publicity earthquake he did for free and regretted forever. And in July, Deliverance premiered, with Reynolds delivering a genuinely great dramatic performance as Lewis, the survivalist. The film was a critical and box office triumph. Reynolds always believed the centerfold cost the film and his performance at the Academy Awards, and he said so bitterly for the rest of his life. It did not matter commercially. The fading TV cowboy was suddenly, at 36, the hottest star in America. What followed was one of the greatest runs any movie star ever had, The Longest Yard in 1974. Then, in May 1977, Smokey and the Bandit, directed by his best friend Needham, made for $4,300,000 and grossing roughly $127 million, second that year only to Star Wars. Hooper, Semi-Tough, Starting Over. The Cannonball Run in 1981, for which he reportedly collected around $5 million, then among the biggest paydays in the business. From 1978 through 1982, theater owners named him the #1 box office draw in the world 5 years running. He bought the ranch, the jet, the mansions, the helicopter. He dated Dinah Shore and Sally Field. At his peak, his fortune was estimated at $60 million. Rick Dalton dreams of exactly this. Reynolds lived it. And then, with the whole industry at his feet, he started saying no to the wrong things. He turned down Han Solo. He turned down James Bond, telling the producers an American could not play the part. He turned down Die Hard, and in the decision he called the biggest regret of his career, he turned down the role of the astronaut Garrett Breedlove in terms of endearment, choosing instead to honor a promise to Needham and make the race comedy Stroker Ace in 1983. Jack Nicholson took Breedlove and won the Academy Award. Stroker Ace flopped. The slide had begun. Then his body betrayed him, and the fall turned cruel. On the 1984 film City Heat with Clint Eastwood, a stunt went wrong on day one, and Reynolds took a metal chair across the jaw. The injury shattered his temporomandibular joint and left him in constant grinding pain that doctors struggled to diagnose. He could barely eat. His weight collapsed by dozens of pounds, and he became dependent on prescription painkillers, a battle he later described openly. Hollywood, watching him waste away in the mid-'80s, whispered something worse. The rumor spread that Reynolds was dying of AIDS, and in that era the rumor alone was career poison. Producers stopped calling. Friends vanished. He spent years fighting his way back to health, while his film career cratered through a string of flops. Television, the world he had escaped, took him back in. His sitcom Evening Shade ran from 1990 to 1994, and even won him an Emmy in 1991. But behind the smile, the empire was rotting. His 1988 marriage to actress Lonnie Anderson collapsed into a 1993 divorce filing that became a 2-year tabloid war, complete with monthly payments, reported at $47,000. His outside investments were a massacre, most famously a restaurant chain called Po Folks, whose failure was reported to have cost him around $15 million. CBS sued him over a $3,700,000 loan. He fell behind on mortgages and taxes. And in December 1996, the man who had been the #1 star on earth filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in West Palm Beach, Florida, listing $6,650,000 in assets against $11,200,000 in debts, including that unforgettable $121,000 owed to his hairpiece maker. He eventually auctioned his treasures to pay people back. His Smokey and the Bandit jacket alone sold for $34,375. Rick Dalton, in the film, cries in his driveway about being a has-been. The real version came with court filings. And then came the ending Tarantino would have been accused of inventing. In 1997, director Paul Thomas Anderson offered Reynolds the role of Jack Horner, the pornographic film director with an artist's soul, in Boogie Nights. Reynolds hated the subject matter and reportedly turned the part down again and again before finally saying yes. He clashed with his young director, disliked the finished film, and even parted ways with his agent over it. The world disagreed with him. His performance was hailed as the best of his life. He won the Golden Globe, and in early 1998, Burt Reynolds sat in the Academy Awards audience as a nominee for Best Supporting Actor, the fading star given the comeback role. Exactly the miracle Rick Dalton prays for. He lost the Oscar that night to Robin Williams, but the redemption was real, and it carried him through 2 more decades of steady work, until Tarantino came calling with the George Spahn role in 2018, a chance to stand inside the very 1969 Hollywood that had made and nearly unmade him. He rehearsed it, he loved it, and on September 6, 2018, his heart stopped before the cameras rolled. The film opened on July 26, 2019, grossed over $370 million worldwide, and won Brad Pitt an Oscar for playing a stuntman inspired partly by Reynolds' own best friend. The movie is, among everything else, an accidental memorial to Burt Reynolds. So let's settle what the film really took from him. Rick Dalton's skeleton is documented Reynolds, the television western apprenticeship, the failure to cross into films through the 60s, the flight to Italy for a Sergio Corbucci western, down to the poster modeled on Navajo Joe, the bond with a stuntman double who becomes his other half, drawn from Reynolds and Hal Needham. What the film changes is the blend and the timeline. Dalton also carries the careers of Hardin, Edd Byrnes, and the other lost TV cowboys, plus a fictional brush with the Manson family that belongs to history, not to Reynolds. And the single biggest difference is the aftermath the film never shows. Rick Dalton's story stops at the edge of hope in 1969. The real man's story kept going, up to the mountaintop, all the way down through injury, rumor, and bankruptcy, and then back up one last time with Boogie Nights. That is the truth hiding inside Tarantino's fairy tale. Fame in Hollywood is not a possession, it is a lease, and the rent compounds. Burt Reynolds held the #1 spot on Earth for 5 straight years and still ended up auctioning his own jacket to pay his debts. Yet he outlasted the fall, won the respect that eluded him at his peak, and died with one foot on a Tarantino set. Rick Dalton got a happy ending written for him. Burt Reynolds had to act his out twice in real life, and that, not the stardom, is the performance worth remembering. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new documentary every week, and drop a comment. Which real figure behind a famous movie should we cover next?